Bundesliga, storyline number one. It's very simply Bayern Munich from a couple different standpoints. One, are they better? Because last season was, maybe calling it a train wreck is a slight exaggeration, but it wasn't all that far off. And they found a way to win the league after giving it away. Dortmund handed it back to them. But it was very clear you had two different things going on here. You had a decline that was already happening. Their lack of competitiveness in Europe was just decreasing. And you had the departure of Robert Lewandowski. And there was no replacement. Eric Maxim Choupo-Moting scored a bunch of goals in that short period of time, and then other than that, they didn't get really anything. Sadio Mane didn't work. He's already gone. So those two things combined to a very, very poor season for Bayern. So this storyline to me has two different components. The first one is just simply, are Bayern much better? Obviously, Harry Kane is there now. Didn't really get a chance to talk about Harry Kane on video. To me, this is the time to make the move. Is ultimately where I came down on it. Go win trophies now. If you want a peaceful exit from Spurs, this is the way to do it. To leave the league, to not run your contract down. I'm going to talk about that with Mbappe later. To get Spurs money so that you're not causing them headaches, you're not going to a rival, and you're basically guaranteeing yourself trophies at some point here with Bayern. And then, if you want to go back in 2 seasons, whether Spurs or somewhere else, absolutely, you can go back in 3 seasons and still break the Premier League goal scoring record. Obviously, Harry Kane, from a Bayern perspective, brings a whole new dynamic to this attack. Can he get them back to the point where they are contenders to win the Champions League? And then the second part of this. Is there a title race in this league? Can Dortmund or somebody else, probably Dortmund, hang with this Bayern team? Because it's not just Harry Kane that got brought in here. Kim Min-jae, Rafael Guerrero, Konrad Laimer. I'm a huge fan of Kim's, as is just about everybody after what he did for Napoli last season. Rafael Guerrero, you're taking an important player from your biggest rival. Konrad Laimer, they're just, Bayern's continuing to just grab Leipzig midfielders. This is a much better team than last season's. Particularly because Sadio Mane didn't work. So it's not like you lost anything there. And I am incredibly confident Harry Kane is going to be fine. So that's the other part of it, is that Bayern have clearly made a point of saying this is not going to happen again. Can they actually prevent it? And can Borussia Dortmund keep pace with an improved Bayern? Because part of the story last season was that Bayern stooped down to Borussia Dortmund's level. It's not like Dortmund elevated themselves to Bayern's level the way that, for example, Liverpool have with Manchester City in some of those title races. Not the same thing in the Bundesliga last season. So that is storyline 1. Storyline 2, is the tiers. And kind of how does this all play out outside of what I'm calling tier 1? And I have Bayern, Dortmund, and Leipzig in that tier. I'm going to talk about Leipzig in storyline number 3. It's a very different team, but ultimately I just assume they're still going to be the third best team in this league until proven otherwise. So you've got those 3, and then you have what makes this really interesting for me. Last season, your clear tier 2 were Union Berlin and Freiburg. Then you had Bayer Leverkusen, Eintracht Frankfurt, Wolfsburg behind them. And if you want to throw Borussia Mönchengladbach, who had a poor season in there because, they're usually in that Champions League conversation, in the Europa League conversation, that's fine. You can put them in that tier 3 too. Now you've kind of switched the roles here to a certain extent. Union Berlin, Champions League responsibilities. Freiburg playing in Europe again. You've got some of these other teams that don't have those European responsibilities and don't have those extra games. And these are also the teams that you're generally expecting to take those 4th, 5th, 6th spots. Your Leverkusens, your Mönchengladbachs, your Frankfurts, your Wolfsburgs. Can they at least get back into that conversation and enter the tier that Union Berlin and Freiburg appear to be in? And then the other part of this is, there have been some changes at those two clubs. Union Berlin have really reloaded to try and reinforce that squad, bolster that squad, to be prepared to make a Champions League run and do what they need to do in the Bundesliga. So I'm curious to see if they can actually pull it off, because so often you see teams struggle with those dual responsibilities. And even last season, the Union Berlin team that showed up in the Europa League was not the same one playing in the Bundesliga every weekend. You could tell that it took a toll on them. It just was the opposite of what it usually is. They didn't do well in Europe as opposed to suffering in the league. So that is storyline 2 for me, is does this conversation get more interesting? Does somebody really go and claim that 4th spot? Is this just now the new order for a little while that Union Berlin and Freiburg back it up? And are the two teams battling for that last Champions League spot again? What does this ultimately look like? And then number 3, the new look attacks in this league. Obviously talked about Kane at Bayern Munich. What does that look like? It's just weird to think about Harry Kane not playing for Tottenham, you know? And as I talked about before, how much does he actually elevate Bayern? All those things. Then, I also alluded to this. What's going on at Leipzig? Lois Openda, Benjamin Sesko in, Christopher Nkunku, Andre Silva out. You basically rebuilt your entire strike force. Leverkusen, you lost Moussa Diaby. Eintracht Frankfurt lost one of my favorite players in the world, Daichi Kamada. Marcus Thuram is no longer at Borussia Mönchengladbach. There were a lot of key attackers from this league last season that are no longer there. And you throw in the Harry Kane element of this as well. And so that's where, from Leipzig's standpoint, I'm still putting them in that tier with Dortmund and Bayern. But also, we need to see this work, because I've talked about this before. Christopher Nkunku is incredible. I don't think he gets enough credit for what he did for Leipzig. You're bringing in 2 strikers that haven't done it in this league before. Now, Lois Openda was phenomenal for Lens last season. I'm a big believer in his too. I think he's going to be fine. You know, Benjamin Sesko, we're talking about a step up in competition level. But sometimes you get to Leipzig and it just doesn't work for whatever reason. Or you're Timo Werner and it doesn't work when you leave Leipzig. So that is the other storyline here for me, is that there have been a lot of pieces that have moved around for some of the teams that are expecting to be competing at the top of this league, whether that is additions or primarily subtractions, or in Leipzig's case, a little bit of both. Is there a departure that really is the one that stands out, that hurts a team? Is there somebody that arrives that just hits the ground running? Does Lois Openda go score 20-plus goals again? You know, because that's what Leipzig have to replace. They got an awfully good player to do it. But you just never know until you actually see it happen.